Your great-grandfather walked out of a store in 1837 carrying $87 worth of iron on his body, and not one soul asked him for a permit. His name was Ezra Boone. Missouri trapper. That spring, he stepped out of William Sublet's outfitting store in St. Louis with a Horkin rifle over his back, a cap and ball revolver at his right hip, and a Bowie knife riding his left. He carried a belt axe, a patch knife tied to his hunting bag, a boot pistol, a powder horn, a ball pouch, flint and steel. And tucked inside his capote, wound tight against a bad night in a bad town, he carried a slingshot. He signed the ledger, stepped into the mud of Front Street, and nobody stopped him. Nobody measured the blade. Nobody checked the barrel. Nobody asked for a license. He was headed to the Green River Rendezvous, and the belt he wore was not some outlaw costume. It was the ordinary working belt of the ordinary working American man west of the Mississippi. Today, most Americans couldn't legally leave the house wearing half of what Ezra Boone carried just to buy flour. In 1837, not one item on that belt required paperwork. Now, depending on what state line you stand behind, a good share of it could put a modern citizen in a courtroom before sundown. But here's the twist, friend. The record says the country didn't get safer when it took that belt away. It just got quieter about who was still allowed to be dangerous. And Ezra Boone. We'll come back to Ezra. Before we go on, there's something coming for this country, and the news won't say a word about it until it's already on your doorstep. It all comes down to one number. 3 days. That's what the stores hold for you. Your grandfather's pantry held a winter, and the difference was never money. It was knowing. 904 pages of that knowing in one book. Water. Fire. Curing. Canning. Plants that heal. Plants that kill. EliasMercer.shop, links below. All right. Back to it. I'm Elias Mercer. 7th generation on Mercer Ridge, deep in the Blue Ridge. My people came through the Cumberland Gap in the 1790s and never left. Near everything I'm about to lay out on this table, my grandfather Eli copied into a leather journal before he died at 94. And he made me swear the old iron and the old ways would not die with me. This is me keeping my word. Some of what I'm about to count down was once legal in every state in this union when your great-great-granddad carried it. Illegal in most of them now. Number 19. That was classified as a military weapon in the 1930s, though a working man once bought it over the counter for $28. Number 10. New York outlawed it in 1849. First concealed weapon this country ever banned. And it was a rock in a sock. And number 7. Fewer than 200 trappers alive today are still licensed to set one. That's the one they worked hardest to bury. These tools did not disappear because a mountain man stopped needing them. They disappeared because somebody got richer the day he was told he couldn't have them. That's not a conspiracy. That's just how markets work. Before we start counting, tap subscribe. Not for me. Do it because we're pulling buried American iron back into daylight, and you'll want the next one they'd rather stay forgotten. 25 outlawed pieces of iron. Starting at number 25 and working down to the one thing your ancestor carried that this country still cannot legally take back from you. Number 25, the Bowie knife. Look at that big double-edged blade on the fur pelt in front of me. Brass guard. Bone handle. 9.5 inches of Arkansas steel. That's a Bowie. James Black forged the first one in a Washington, Arkansas smithy around 1830. And after Jim Bowie cut his way out of the Sandbar fight in 1827, every man on the frontier wanted one riding his hip. A working Bowie cost around $2.50 in 1835. Alabama outlawed carrying it in public in 1837. Tennessee followed in 1838. They didn't ban the forge, friend. They banned the belt. For nearly 200 years the Bowie remained the standard by which frontier fighting knives were judged. Somebody just made sure you couldn't wear it downtown. That one they legislated. The next one, they taxed until a poor man couldn't afford it. Number 24, the Arkansas toothpick. The Arkansas toothpick was the Bowie's meaner cousin. Straighter. Longer. Double-edged. Made more for the thrust than the slice. Usually anywhere from 12 to 20 inches. Resin Bowie, Jim's brother, is often credited with the patent around 1832. A frontier laborer could buy one for about $1.75. Then in 1837, Alabama passed what papers of the time called the toothpick tax, a $100 excise on the sale of Bowie-style and Dirk-style blades. $100 in 1837. That was more than many working men made in a year. Publicly, it was sold as safety after tavern killings. In practice, it priced the frontier blade out of common hands. Not banned. Just made unreachable. That was the tax. The next one they replaced with a hardware store hatchet and sold back to you at triple the cost. Number 23, the belt tomahawk. See that small axe on the table with the dark handle? Hudson's Bay pattern. 1820s design. Roughly 14 ounces in the head, 18 inches of hickory haft. That's a belt tomahawk. For 200 years it slid through the back of a working man's belt. It split kindling, drove tent stakes, dressed deer, broke bone, and if things turned ugly, it could go through a man's collarbone. A trade post sold one for 50 to 80 cents in 1830. Today they market the same tool as tactical, coat it black, and ask you for $180. Same axe. Higher price. Different customer. That one they didn't ban. They just made it fashionable enough to be expensive. The next one helped open the country itself. Number 22, the Kentucky long rifle. Take a look at that long rifle with the dark stock, brass patch box, and octagonal barrel. That's a Kentucky rifle, though truth be told, it was born in Pennsylvania, built by German gunsmiths in places like Lancaster beginning in the 1700s. Usually around .40 caliber, long-barreled, accurate, and made for a man who ate what he killed. A Pennsylvania farmer paid around $12 for one in 1810. When William Ashley ran his famous ad in the Missouri Gazette in 1822, calling for 100 enterprising young men to ascend the Missouri, many of the men who answered carried rifles of this class upriver. For generations, it was one of the finest offhand hunting arms on the continent. That was the rifle that opened the West. The next one was the ounce of horn a man couldn't survive an hour without. Number 21, the powder horn. See the horn on the table with the applewood plug. Cow horn, boiled, scraped thin, plugged at both ends, sealed with grease or tallow. That's a powder horn. A trapper carried 3/4 of a pound to a full pound of black powder in one, and by long habit he could measure charges by feel, even in the dark. In 1830, it cost a dime and an evening's whittling. Today you can buy a plastic flask for several times that, and it still won't feel half as alive in the hand. Those old horns weren't decorations. They were working memory. Names scratched in them. Dates. Tallies. Maps. Little pieces of a man's life carried on his side. First horn I ever tried to plug, I split lengthwise because I set the applewood in too dry. Eli laughed till he coughed and told me, "The horn tells you when it's ready." It does. I just wasn't listening yet. That was the powder. Now we come to the rifle that outshot the Kentucky and made a mountain man rich. First patent break, neighbor. Notice what's happened so far. They didn't crush these tools all at once. They taxed the edges, legislated the carry, raised the price, closed the workshops, and made sure your grandson couldn't afford the good one. It gets less polite from here. Number 20, the Horkin rifle. Look at that rifle with the lighter stock, brass furniture, half stock build, and heavy barrel. That's a Horkin. Jacob and Samuel Horkin, brothers and gunsmiths in St. Louis, began building plains rifles in the 1820s. Usually .50 to .5 for caliber, shorter and stouter than the Kentucky, made to hit hard and survive hard country. A working trapper paid around $25 in 1835, a lot of money, yes, but money he could make back in one good spring of beaver. Kit Carson carried one. Jim Bridger trusted one. And more than one man crossed half a continent behind one. Today, replicas sell for over $1,000. They never banned the Horkin. They just let the last workshops die. That was the rifle a man traveled with. The next one was what he pulled when the rifle was empty. Number 19, the Colt Walker revolver. That big revolver on the table with the wooden grip, 9-inch barrel, and brick-heavy frame. That's the Colt Walker. Built in 1847 to the specifications of Captain Samuel Walker of the Texas Rangers, it was some Colt's answer to one question: can a handgun hit like a rifle? For its day, yes. It weighed about 4.5 pounds unloaded, chambered .44, and hit with frightening authority. A working man could buy one for $28 in 1848. Same iron today. Museum piece. Originals now sell for fortunes. That was once a sidearm a man could buy over the counter. Now it belongs to collectors, lawyers, and glass cases. That was the man's stopper. The next one was the first practical revolver that started the whole story. Number 18, the Colt Pattison. Look close, small grip, 5-shot cylinder, folding trigger. That's the Colt Pattison, patented in 1836 and built in Pattison, New Jersey. Before that design, a man usually had 1 shot and a prayer. After it, he had 5. A Texas Ranger paid around $40 for one in 1839, and the Republic of Texas ordered them too. But the design was expensive, delicate, and ahead of its market. Colt went bankrupt in 1842. Then Samuel Walker showed up with notes, and the Walker was born out of the ashes. For all its flaws, the Pattison changed the idea of what a sidearm could be. That was the revolver that started it. The next one came out when the belt gun was empty and the distance got measured in feet. Number 17, the pepperbox pistol. Small. Ugly. 6 barrels turning around a central spindle. That's the pepperbox. Ethan Allen's Massachusetts shop turned them out in the late 1830s. They weren't accurate beyond spitting distance, but at a card table, in a saloon, or in a muddy alley, 6 quick shots mattered a whole lot more than elegance. Price? Around $12. It was not a mountain gun. It was a town gun. A close-quarters gun. A right-now gun. Mechanically, it helped pave the road toward the double-action revolver. Unlike a lot of small carry arms, it later got folded into a web of restrictions, classifications, and concealed carry lore that modern citizens navigate only with paperwork and caution. That was concealed iron. The next one was simpler, smaller, and worn by nearly every free trapper alive. Number 16, the Green River knife. That thin little blade on the fur there, 6 inches or so, plain handle, no show to it. That's a Green River knife. John Russell began making them in 1834 in Massachusetts. They found their way west in bales and bundles until nearly every rendezvous had them in quantity. Cost? About 50 cents. A man skinned beaver with it, dressed deer, cut tobacco, opened letters, cleaned fish, and if it came to it, defended his own throat. People remember the big theatrical blades. What they forget are the small working blades that did 90% of the living. That was the everyday knife. The next one hung from their hunting bag and almost never left it. Number 15, the patch knife. See that little knife in the leather sheath, tied by thong to the hunting bag strap? That's a patch knife. 3 inches of blade. Maybe a little more. Its first job was simple: trim the greased patch from the muzzle after a round ball was rammed home. That's it. But a frontier tool never stayed trapped in one job. That same blade gutted trout, cut twine, trimmed hide, opened mail, notched wood, and cut tack in the dark. A man could buy one for 20 cents in the early 1830s. Today, if you want one made right by a real working smith, you may pay many times that. Not banned. Just made uncommon enough that most people don't even know what they're looking at. That was the small companion. The next one came north by Spanish trade and carried a different bloodline in its steel. Second patent break. This is where the story stops feeling quaint and starts sounding like felony. From here down, you start stepping into categories modern lore watches closely. And number 10, remember this, was the one New York banned first. Before the national fights. Before the endless arguments. Before the registry language. There was number 10. Number 14, the Bowie Juke. The Bowie Juke was a southwestern trade dagger that came up through Santa Fe from Spanish sources. Long single edge. Straight guard. Wood grip. Usually 12 to 14 inches overall. A mountain man might trade a beaver pelt for one in the mid-1830s. South of the Arkansas River, it had a reputation. Dry country blade. Trade steel. Not Easton. Not polite. The point is not that everybody had one. The point is that such a blade once moved openly in trade across the same country that now writes length-based lower-round knives. That was the trade blade. The next one lay flat against the chest when the belt was already full. Number 13, the neck knife. 2.5 inches of blade in a rawhide sheath on a leather cord under the hunting shirt. That's a neck knife. A man drew it with his offhand when his strong side was pinned. He drew it when he fell in water. He drew it when a bear had one arm and he still intended to keep the other. It cost next to nothing, a few coins or an afternoon's work. Small hidden blades like that predate nearly every modern definition of the concealed knife, but the lore came later and rewrote the category around the way such tools were worn. That was the hidden blade. The next one hid in the boot instead. Number 12, the boot pistol. Also called a muff pistol. Single shot. Percussion cap. Small barrel. Usually something like .36 caliber. Built to hide in a knee-high boot or, back in the settlements, in a woman's for muff. A working trapper paid about $9. It came out when the belt gun was empty. When a man was seated. When company arrived at the fire and something didn't feel right. Then over the generations, the whole class of pocket-sized handguns got slowly rebranded from practical to suspect, from common to criminal. First percussion cap I ever seated, I set it crooked and sent the shot into a maple tree 6 inches from Eli's boot. He didn't raise his voice. He just looked at me a long time and said, "Do it again." Right this time. I did. That was concealed iron. The next one was sold to tribes and trappers alike for nearly 200 years. Number 11, the trade musket. The Northwest gun. Smoothbore. Around .60 caliber. Long barrel. Brass serpent side plate. Sold by trading companies from the 1700s onward. A trapper or a native hunter might pay in pelts, not dollars. It shot bull. It shot bird. It shot buck and bull. It killed duck, deer, and men, and sometimes grizzly if the shooter kept his hands steady enough to reload quickly. It may well be one of the most common frontier firearms in North American history, and yet it barely survives in public memory. Nobody had to outlaw it. They only had to let it fall out of the story. That was the smoothbore. The next one was not a gun, not a blade, and New York moved on it before either. Number 10, the slingshot. A leather-bound lead weight on a braided thong with a wrist loop. That's the slingshot. Simple. Quiet. Brutal at short range. A sailor knew what it could do. A mountain man knew what it was for in a saloon or an alley when he needed something silent and fast. And in 1849, New York banned it. Read that again in your head. One of the earliest concealed weapon bans in this country went after a rock in a sock. Before the modern arguments. Before the forms. Before the bureaucratic machinery. That was the silent iron. The next one came from the plains tribes and from trappers who lived among them. Third pattern break. First they go after a rock. Then a blade. Then the small gun. Then the large gun. Then the trap. And most of the men who carried these things never hurt anybody. Remember that when we hit number 7. Number 9, the gunstock war club. Shaped like the stock of a musket. Dense hardwood. Curved profile. Sometimes a spike or blade set into the elbow. That's the gunstock war club. Plains tribes carried them. Trappers who wintered with the Crow or Shoshone knew them. Men who married into those nations learned what they were for. A blow from one could cripple a horse. Cost? An evening of carving and a scrap of iron. And like so much else, it vanished so fully from common memory that when similar impact tools reappeared in modern form, they were treated like new inventions. That was the club. The next one hit up the sleeve, shot once, and one time was often enough. Number 8, the Derringer. Henry Derringer of Philadelphia built the early pocket percussion pistols that later borrowed his name. One shot. Usually large caliber for the size. Tiny barrel. Easy concealment. A gambler carried one. A riverboat man carried one. A traveler in town carried one. And yes, history darkened its name permanently when Booth used one. But mechanically and culturally, the Derringer sits at the root of the deep concealment pistol. Small, easy to hide, easy to dismiss until the moment it mattered. That was the last-ditch gun. And the next one is the iron on this table that half the country learned to fear without ever having seen one set. Number 7, the bear trap. That trap on the table, jaws wide, steel springs, offset pan, that's a bear trap. Newhouse made famous patents in the 1800s, and by the middle of the century a frontier trapper might pay around $4 for one that would feed him for years. Then, a century and a half later, state after state turned against the leg-hold trap. Massachusetts, Colorado, California, Arizona, Washington. The stated reason was cruelty. The effect was the same everywhere. A profession 2 centuries old collapsed in broad daylight. In parts of the country, there are scarcely any licensed longline trappers left. That was the iron of the trapline. The next one was not a weapon by itself, but without it none of the rest worked as a system. 4th patent break, the last one before we count down to the belt itself. A whole profession can vanish in one vote if enough people doing the voting have never once seen the thing they are outlawing. Number 6, the Possibles bag. That leather bag beside the powder horn, deer hide, hand-stitched, maybe 12 inches square, slung over the left shoulder. That's the Possibles bag. Ball mold. Patches. Flint and steel. Tobacco. Awl. Thread. Patch knife on the strap. It was everyday carry, 1830 style. It cost nothing but the deer already shot and the hands to sew it. Today you can spend hundreds on a tactical shoulder bag that carries the same load with half the sole. Nobody banned the bag. They just taught you to feel ridiculous for making one. That was the bag. The next one is what he poured into it every night at camp. Number 5, the ball mold and lead ladle. Small iron pliers with a hinged mold at the nose. That's a ball mold. A mountain man carried lead and cast his own round balls over coals, one at a time, by hand, forever, for the cost of metal and labor. A mold cost around $1 at sublets in the 1830s. Think about what that means. A man who can cast his own ammunition is a man who doesn't have to wait for a shelf to be stocked. Still legal in broad use for traditional muzzleloading. Still accurate. Still practical. Not banned. Just made to look primitive. That was the ammunition. The next one is the oldest and smallest iron on the belt. Number 4, flint and steel. A curved striker. Good flint. Char cloth. Oiled leather pouch. That's flint and steel. A mountain man could make fire in under a minute in weather that kills men carrying modern conveniences. And yes, most modern accounts miss this, that steel striker also served as close-hand iron in an emergency. 2 good pounds in a fist against a throat or temple is still iron, however small. A working set cost about 10 cents at a trading post. 2 centuries old, and still faster than a wet lighter in cold wind if the hands know what they are doing. That was the smallest iron. The next one hit against the wrist and inside the boot. Number 3, the wrist knife and boot knife. That small blade with the blue handle and brass guard there, and the darker one beside it. Wrist knife. Boot knife. Forearm blade. 3 inches of fixed blade tucked against skin under a sleeve or inside a moccasin top. A man drew it when he was seated with strangers. When his rifle hand got grabbed. When his belt was pinned under a horse. Any competent smith on the frontier could forge one cheap. Today concealed fixed blades are among the most heavily scrutinized categories of edged tools in the lore. That was the hidden edge. The next one wasn't metal at all. It was the coat he wore. And the coat itself was part of the weapon system. Number 2, the capote. That coat you see draped over the chair, wool blanket coat, often made from a Hudson's Bay trade blanket, hooded, thick, weatherproof enough to matter. That's the capote. A mountain man wore it for warmth, for concealment, for rough armor against glancing cuts and low-energy blows, and because every fold in it could hide what the belt no longer held. A boot pistol. A neck knife. A slingshot. Char cloth. Cordage. Half his little world if need be. Nobody banned the coat. They just replaced it with nylon and convinced you the old one was costume. That was the outer layer. And that brings us, at last, to number 1. The one thing on this table you cannot buy in any store, in any state, at any price. Number 1, the belt itself. Number 1 is not a piece of iron. Look at the table. The bowie. The horkin. The colt. The tomahawk. The powder horn. The possibles bag. The flint and steel. The capote. These are not separate curiosities. They are a system. A mountain man was not dangerous because he carried a bowie knife. He was dangerous because he carried a bowie knife and a rifle and a pistol and a hidden blade and a fire kit and a bag with 1,000 miles of independence inside it. And he had likely made, repaired, fitted, sharpened, cast, stitched, or mended most of it himself. That's the belt. Not leather. System. Layered self-reliance worn on the body. The physical shape of a man who did not need permission to defend his life, feed his family, travel light, or leave a bad place under his own power. That is number 1. Sovereignty worn on the body. And Ezra Boone. He made rendezvous at Green River that July. Traded his pelts. Wintered with the Crow. Died in 1889, 81 years old, on a farm in the Bitterroot Valley. Buried with his Horkin. All his teeth still in his head. He never asked a courthouse for anything. And the country he lived in eventually decided that was the problem. They didn't take the belt off Ezra. They took it off his grandson. Then his great-grandson. Then you. Not with a raid. With 180 years of paperwork. One buckle at a time. That's the theft. That's number 1. Now hear me plain. I'm not telling you to strap on a full 1837 belt and march into your county courthouse. Half of what's on this table could land a modern man in jail before dinner depending on where he lives. Know your laws. Stay inside them. This is history. And history teaches. So pick one thing. Just one this month. Cast your own round balls over a fire if you're a muzzleloader. Sew a real possibles bag from deer hide and hand-stitch the strap. Learn to strike flame with flint and steel until you can do it in under a minute in the wind. Or buy a plain patch knife from an American smith who's still working. One of those 4. Don't try to relearn a whole century of belt in one weekend. Learn one buckle. 2 winters back, I cast 50 round balls from an old mold Eli left me. Took 3 hours. Cost me $2 in lead. Shot all 50 the next spring, and every one flew true. Cheaper than the box on the shelf. Better for the hands. Better for the memory. Tell me down below. Which piece on this table did your grandfather or great-grandfather carry? Which one still lives in a drawer, trunk, shed, or barn on your land? Whichever answer gets the most comments, that's the one I count down next. Your great-great-grandfather wore every piece on this table and never signed a paper for any of it. Now you know what a free man looked like. Don't let that picture die in your generation. Somebody has to remember. Next time, we're going deeper into the possibles bag, the one small item a mountain man carried that treated a bullet wound, a snake bite, and a fever in the same week, then got pushed out of common use by the modern world and sold back later at boutique prices. If you want that one, tap subscribe. We're pulling this old iron and old knowledge back into the daylight one buckle at a time. And there are more of you every week doing it with me. That matters more than you know. Keep the old ways. They kept us.